So we'll reconvene. Kalinda, can you just let me know if we've got the quorum necessary?
We have a quorum, Chair.
Thank you. Members, now we're going to item 11, which is on page 243 of our agenda. And this is changes to the Auckland Unitary Plan and Islands Plan to deliver better quality intensification. And this one is the first of today, our decision-making reports on the MPSUD and enabling housing supply legislation that we've been discussing in the overview paper. Now, Michelle and Celia will be with us. Michelle Perwick, Senior Policy Planner, and Celia Davison, Manager for Planning Central and South. They'll be with us and they'll be taking us through to look at our further considerations of investigations for changes in the Unitary Plan. And these have come about after some consideration over the last 18 months. We've been giving staff direction. We've been having meetings and workshops. Local board chairs were invited to these as well, and these were undertaken in 2021. So we'll now look at those amendments, and I will move the motions before us. There are some slight changes. These are staff recommended changes to the original motions or recommendations. So I'll move those. Deputy Chair, would you second those, please?
Okay, happy to second.
Thank you. They're coming up there now, but right now I will now hand over to Celia Davison to introduce the topic.
Kia ora, Chair. Apologies, I will be Celia Davison today. Unfortunately, there's some urgent matters to attend to. By way of introduction, my name is Wayne Seal. I'm a Senior Policy Planner and I work within the work stream as well. So thanks for your accommodation today. And as the Chair mentioned, with me is Michelle Perwick. So item 11 today's really is about seeking endorsement for staff to further progress work investigating amendments to the Auckland Unitary Plan. So this report covers two strands. Firstly, around issues arising from the MPSUD removal of parking minimums and the 5 issues around that to address private ways. And the second strand goes to the quality and intensification aspects. So just to clarify that we're all sort of on the same page, this is about the rules themselves. So regardless of how we may spatially apply the zoning as well as the various qualifying matters, these are what the rules could potentially look like. And I'll just note that some of the strategic approach was workshop with the planning committee earlier in the month. And as per, I think John's comment further in the previous report, that prior to the intensification planning instrument going out for statutory notification, there'll be another report coming to the planning committee which will look into the specific rule provisions in further detail. So this is a endorsement for the strategic approach. And as the chair noted, we have suggested some changes to the recommendations around the private ways, and I'm sure Michelle will speak to that. So if the chair is all right with that, we were going to have sort of a tag team, Michelle, to speak to her part, and I'll go through some slides quickly and we'll have questions at the end.
Thank you. Let's proceed.
Yep. And Michelle, I think the floor is yours. I don't think she has any slides for this calendar. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We have met with both the local boards and the planning committee and workshops since over 2020 and more recently with the local boards in 2022. The work for the private ways has originated from the Section 35 monitoring report, which council is obliged to undertake 5 years after the Unitary Plan became operative. And that was the work there focused on the quality of the built environment. And also council has, as you know, has a register to identify concerns that are raised with the implementation and performance of the AUP. Both of these raised issues and which has led to the projects that we're looking at, the private ways. The work on the with the removal of car parking minimums as directed by the MPSUD has also led to issues with regards to matters such as accessible parking, loading spaces, the provision of parking pedestrian access when there is no vehicle access to a property, and also related matters such as loading spaces, bike access and storage and future EV proofing of parking sites where they are provided. From that, we've developed a number of, we'd like to develop it. We've developed a number of options on how to address this. We've recommended that the 2 work streams for 5 issues, which deal with those car parking minimum issues, and the private ways be combined into one project because of the integration between the two and the overlap of matters, particularly with regards to pedestrian access and safety and servicing, etc. In addition, many of the stakeholders between the 2 work streams are in common, and it would be beneficial to have those work undertaken together, and it would lead to a more integrated response. I'd also like to add that we've generally had good support from the local boards who are very keen to see the work progress for both 5 issues and private ways. Although they would like, they raised some queries about the disadvantages of relying on non-statutory methods from central government, such as the building code and others, to address matters such as EV charging, and supported the development of technical guidance on those matters. We have participated in hui that have been organised for the MPSUD since late 2021 and early 2022, and that's raised awareness of the projects, particularly in regard to accessibility, and that has been raised by the iwi attending as a particularly important issue, that communities are safe and connected. So the key risks that we've identified for this project are essentially poor development outcomes that arise from not addressing the removal of car parking minimums and by keeping our existing standards, which are not performing well. We're also looking at, with the private ways, improving the health and safety impacts on people and ensuring that the private ways are actually fit for the function and that they can accommodate the likes of ordinary light vehicle movement as well as emergency services and larger vehicles such as council's rubbish trucks. So our next step after this would be to continue to consult with mana whenua local boards and key stakeholders, and then to report back to the committee in August 20. No, sorry, to report back to the committee prior to the any notification of a plan change.
Cool.
Now I'll return to my colleague Wayne, who will walk you through the quality intensification work that he's been responsible for.
Thanks, Michelle.
Can I just interrupt you? Is the presentation changing slides for other members? I'm looking at the same opening slide. It's the same? Okay, I've got a second one now. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
So, sorry to clarify, Michelle didn't have any slides. She's much more eloquent than I am, so it's going to be me who's going to rely on them.
Good.
Cool. Yeah, so thanks for that segue there, Michelle. So just to provide a really high-level summary and acknowledging that there's quite a complex overlapping area around various legislation, the MPSUD and the latest amendment bill. So just to provide a summary of the approach to date, the key delineating factor is walkable catchments, whether you're outside or inside of it. So across or both areas spatially, council is required to implement the medium density residential standards, except where qualifying matters apply. However, within the walkable catchment, the MPSUD directs council to enable at least 6 stories, again, except where qualifying matters applies. And what part of the workstream has been doing in terms of our approach into enabling these outcomes is also to put on a quality built environment lens. In terms of the approach within the walkable catchment, these are the 5 outcomes that we're working towards. So number 1, obviously the legislative requirement of enabling at least 6 stories, but also we want to temper that in terms of ensuring good on-site amenity, managing dominance effects on streets such as shading, and also sort of visual connectivity. Outcome 4, managing privacy on adjoining sites and neighbours, such as privacy, dominance and shading, and sunlight access. And finally, outcome 5, responding to climate change, so that lens of climate resilience. Again, a really high level overview. So the MPSUD and the 6 stories staff has interpreted as in terms of applying FAB zoning to it, but also in terms of interpreting the MPSUD requirement, we are a lot of our provision has been tested architecturally on the assumption of quote unquote a typical site within those walkable catchments, which is taken to be an 800-meter square site, so approximately 18 meters wide by 44.5 meter in depth. As noted, qualified matters will apply appropriately within these walkable catchments, but also I think cognizant of the underlying current in terms of some of the discussions and the work to date is that staff's view is that additional intensity do require greater considerations in terms of managing quality effects, as noted, dominant shedding and privacy. And so I think it's cognizant that in terms of all these conversation, the scope is indeed limited by the Amendment Act and the flow-on effects from the MDRS. So these are some of the provision that's been investigated within the walkable catchments. Firstly, in terms of enabling the height, we're talking about potentially relaxing height in relation boundary within the existing FAB standards into a 19 meters plus 60 on a 60-degree recession plane on the 21.5 meter in the front half of the site, and this is really to encourage that concentrating development on the road frontage and then sort of that perimeter block idea. We're also looking at privacy separation of 8 meters in terms of outdoor living space and outlook space above 3 stories on side and rear boundaries, so that managing effects with adjacent sites, retaining existing FAB's daylight standards, and communal outdoor living space requirements for development of 20 or more dwellings. So providing that flexibility, but still making sure that residents can enjoy those outdoor living amenities. And finally, requirements for deep soil areas to support planted vegetation within landscape areas. And so this is really about making sure that mature trees can thrive and create that tree canopy to address potential climate resilience and heat island effects. And finally, we are proposing to retain existing maximum impervious area of 70% for the FAB zone. In terms of incorporating MDRS and Auckland Unitary Plan, again, I won't belabor the point, but as we are all aware, the legislation has a quite clearly established framework. MDRS is applied to all relevant residential zone, which is taken to be MHQ and FAB, unless a qualifying matter applies. Council may modify a density standard only if it's more lenient, i.e. more enabling than what the MDRS and the Amendment Act has set out. Council may include additional standards controls on different effects. However, it needs to be consequential to incorporating MDRS and then finally to temper some of that MDRS. Council, staff is currently investigating additional built form standards for development of 4 or more dwellings within the MHU zone. And so that image is an example. So all those on the left that apply MDRS standards on a 400-meter site, and then the black and white development on the far right there is your more typical 800-meter site before being subdivided into lots. So again, I won't speak to these, but as just for a refresher to the members, these are the MDRS standards which are set out in legislation, and council must incorporate them into the Auckland Unitary Plan. In terms of the quality intensification aspects of this, we are pulling on quite a number of findings that we've reported to Planning Committee earlier last year around the Section 35 monitoring, but also building on the expertise of our in-house urban design experts. So these are sort of the best planning and best practice outcomes that sort of tempered and how we incorporate the enabling aspect of the 6 stories and the 4+ dwellings. So slightly more scope than the MDRS. And just a really high level refresher, we do note that some of the analysis and recommendations was completed prior to the Resource Management Act Amendment Act coming into effect. So again, as I think the strong message we're trying to send through is it has been sort of tempered in what we're able to do. The Amendment Act and the introduction of the MDRS sort of established the framework and matters which can and cannot be addressed. However, some of the provisions that we're exploring for inclusion in IPI will attempt to address some of those quality outcomes, provided we can demonstrate the consequential to incorporating the MDRS and the MPSUD. And I'll note that table 1 in I think page 294 of the report outlines how some of those matters may interrelate, and I'm happy to speak to them later on or as the questions arise. And finally, some of the reporting through the monitoring has identified matters which are not clearly within scope for this IPI process and may potentially be addressed by future plan change process. And I think that brings me then into a very quick run through of the item. So I guess the floor was yours.
Thank you, Wayne, and thank you, Michelle. Now we'll go to questions, and I have the first question was presented in writing, and I'll allow Councillor Coombe to present it, please.
I appreciate it, Chair. I do submit my questions in writing so that officers have a heads up rather than so they can be read out by the Chair. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding about questions in advance, so thank you. But actually, I think my query that I made of Michelle was just about the drafting, because I didn't think it said resolution A said what it was intended, but I see that that's now been amended. So maybe just some clarification if that was the case. I don't know.
Michelle, can we go to that?
Certainly. The amendment, the recommendation was amended to make it explicit that that was applying to residential private ways and not to those in business and rural areas. And in hindsight, it was recommended that we also take out the limitation on servicing 10 or more parking spaces or rare sites, because there may well be consequential changes and amendments that we need to make to smaller developments servicing between 2 and 9, although our intention is very much to focus on larger developments for the private ways.
Yeah, thank you. So it was just a clarification. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question may to you seem somewhat unrelated, but I have thought about this very deeply, and I think it is, in light of the recommendations, I think it is related. Could the officers please bring us up to speed with where we are with the Ministry of Education and the repeated requests that we've had for new schools and updates on land acquisition to service a lot of this intensification? Because basically we're looking at much more enabling provisions moving forward, but I would like to think that we're looking at them comprehensively, holistically, and it would be interesting for me to know whether or not there's been any success in engaging the Ministry for the Education.
I think that's with our Chief of Strategy, Megan.
Kia ora, Councillor Fletcher, thank you. Look, I think you raised this in the last meeting or so, and I know it's been raised over some time. So we have contacted the Ministry directly. We are just finalising a meeting date, so I don't have any update for you, but we are in the middle of talking to them and hoping to meet with them very shortly.
Yes, because it was intended that as councillors we be included, and some years have now passed on and they have not engaged with us. So it doesn't set the environment for any measure of trust, that's all.
And we are pursuing that meeting, Councillor Fletcher. Thank you. I'll now go to Member Wilson, Member Karen Wilson, please.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Hopefully it'll be short and sharp. I'm just looking at the MIS, as we are wont to do, and looking at what the types of engagement or information has been passed across to mana whenua and mātāwaka. And I note that most of the feedback that has been given was done in a general sense across the NPSUD and not specifically around the investigation and amendments to be made. So my question is apart from updating, what actual consultation around amendments to these matters have been completed, please?
Well, I can answer for the car parking minimum issues and the private ways. Is that we've used the NPSUD forum to alert members to this plan change, and we will be using the normal Schedule 1 processes of advising all mana whenua entities under Clause 4A of the RMA, because it's a very general plan change. But as I said, we wanted to alert people and understand their concerns. I'll pass over to Wayne to comment in terms of intensification in the residential provisions.
Thanks, Michelle. In regards to some of the drafting of the provisions, acknowledging that it is a more general HUI in terms of MPSUD, but also saying we've in the back of our minds, in terms of the drafting, we are cognizant of issues that's been raised in previous engagements, particularly around the provision of papakainga, as well as the concerns around impervious surfaces and the flow-on effects, pardon pun, on that in terms of water quality. And so that will be considered in terms of wider work around the qualifying matters, and also in terms of the effects of intensification around cultural sites of cultural significance, again, through the qualifying matters work stream. It will sort of been the detailed provision we worked out at that space. Yeah, just acknowledging there's a lot of, in terms of overlaps around the various, and unfortunately, it is a bit unfair in terms of our responsibility in terms of delineating them, but that's the approach to date, and I'm not sure if there's anything further, John, you may want to add to that.
Anything further there, John Duguid?
Thank you, Chair, members in the committee. We have had some feedback around incorporating Māori design into medium and larger scale residential developments. It's something we're still progressing how that might play out in terms of this plan change for August. But yeah, maybe just to add that in there as well, there are some aspirations coming through that potentially through this plan change. Maybe a later plan change, it could be this one, but there is an ability to have some assessment criteria, some provisions in the Unitary Plan around Māori design for larger scale residential. So that's just probably something to add to the points Wayne and Michelle have made. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Mr. Chair. After the questions, it'd be good to have a comment made in respect of that. Thank you.
Got it. Yes, we will. Thank you. So just a question from me, Michelle and Wayne, and possibly John as well. On the recommendation C, we talk about providing for the quality built environment outcomes, etc. And we have some reference to that in the report. My understanding is that Celia's team, I gather it's with you, Michelle, and Wayne, are still, that work is not concluded. It's part of it's concluded here, but there's further work. I raise this because this is one of the points that the Mayor and I raised in front of the Select Committee, that we wanted to see much greater attention to the quality of outcomes in addition to the quantity that the government was focusing on. We got very close to getting support for a proposal that we've put forward, but it seemed to evaporate between, I don't know, first reading and second reading, I think. And that was for the convening of an expert group. And that didn't get traction, unfortunately. So can you just take us through what we can do between now and the 20th of August date to further investigate and strengthen and provide even greater opportunity to deliver those quality built outcomes that Aucklanders expect of us if the government haven't provided for it to the extent it is provided in the bill. And then the second part to that is, John, I hear that the government or the MFE has finally woken up and there might be some national design standard work. And could we have a status report on that? So 2 tranches to my inquiry.
I may have a first crack at that, John, if that's okay. In terms of some of the work stream work, beyond some of the provisions we've sort of touched on today, further work we're looking at is through the policy and as well objective and policy to get stronger direction in terms of the outcomes we're seeking, and we're also progressing work around assessment criteria and strengthening of the standards to give council staff the ability to negotiate some of the outcomes through the process. And I think it's important to not lose sight that a lot of our work to date has, in terms of implementing for the MPSUD anyway, and the more intensive development has been, to a certain degree flavoured by this Section 35 monitoring. So I think we have done a bit of work in terms of advancing some of the stuff, and as I said, some of the standards around hydroelectric boundary and encouraging fronting onto the street, and avoiding that sausage flat sort of development and typology, but also a lot of the work that Michelle was doing around the private ways to address the safety issues, to ensure that residents, as we progress into more intense developments, provide for safe and well-being through that space. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything further you want to add there, Michelle, or just cognizant that Nicole Miller, the team leader for the urban design strategy, is also online, if she has anything to add.
My principal comment here would be that the 5 issues in private ways work is a very discrete package, and it's not anticipated that there would be further work being progressed from that. So I think that question is more designed to the residential.
Apologies, Michelle.
Controls.
Well, just before getting on to that, and I see Nicole, our urban design strategy team leader, is online as well. So there is a table in the agenda report, I think it's just after paragraph 36, that indicates the things from our monitoring work on housing in Auckland under the Unitary Plan are able to be addressed, or we're looking to try and address them by August through this piece of work, within the same time frame as the intensification plan change under the MPSUD, and then the matters that really still require further research and evidence before we could really get to the point of making changes to the Unitary Plan. So that table there, Councillor Darby and members, is a useful reference point as to sort of where we're at with what we think we can include by August and what still requires further work, noting that we do have some constraints on us now that we didn't have prior to the Amendment Act going through. So that's in terms of what's in or out of scope at this stage and ongoing work. In terms of the government, Ministry for the Environment, officials are certainly working on national design guidance. Chair, you mentioned standards. I guess in sort of planning speak, standards are, the sort of rules that go into your plan, and the guidance is, non-statutory suggestions as to how you might meet the standards and achieve a good outcome. So it's great to see Ministry doing that. We do have our own Auckland Design Manual. It is leading edge. It's something we are looking to put a bit more time and energy into once we get through this piece of work here. So yeah, there wouldn't be national standards as such, but there certainly would be some guidance, and we're keen to support Ministry for the Environment where we can. But we're certainly very keen to keep our own Auckland Design Manual, which goes well beyond illustrating how to achieve good housing outcomes. It talks about commercial development and a wide range of other design issues. Maybe if I can just quickly ask Nicole if she has anything to add.
Thanks, John. Kia ora koutou. Just wanted to reiterate what Wayne was saying, really, that we are looking closely at what additional standards we can bring in to try and ensure quality built environment outcomes whilst still being in line with MPSUD and the MDRS, but also looking closely at the policies and objectives and assessment criteria in the plan to ensure that we have as many tools available to us as possible to negotiate good outcomes when we're working through the resource consent process. So the more that we have available within the statutory context, the easier it is for us to negotiate better outcomes. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. So this work is not concluded; it's ongoing, and we will see more in that particular area. And John, just confirming conversation with you, I noted that between the build stage and the legislation stage, government removed one of the standards on the impervious surface area. I think it was 60%, and then it dropped right off, and it was left to councils. We're all mindful of the massive floods Monday before last. So just can you confirm with us that Auckland Council is reinstating the 60% standard?
The 60% standard, I think, applied in some of the residential areas, and I think we had a slightly different, more generous standard, well, a different standard, shall we say, that allowed a bit more impervious area in some other zones. So I think the latest state of play, but I'll just check in with Wayne and Michelle, is that we are looking to retain the standards that we currently have on impervious areas. That's correct.
So it's the current standards, and for the medium density zone, it is 60.
I just want to reiterate, I guess, in terms of the qualifying matters, obviously we're working quite closely with Council's Healthy Waters team to understand implications around, it's not just the 60% quantum, but also the, I guess, the increasing amount of development enabled by MDRS and the extension of the FAB zone. So again, that's a bit of work that's been progressed, and unfortunately, I don't think we're reporting it today yet, but just reaffirm. Yeah.
Thank you. No, that's good. Are there other questions, members? I don't think so. Go to comments.
Chair, I had a question. It's Councillor Newman.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Newman. Sorry, Councillor.
Yeah. No, that's the right, Chair. It actually follows on from your question, to be honest, and the officers have raised this in relation to healthy waters. I guess going back to the issue around impervious areas. And see there with respect to quality built environment outcomes in residential areas. I mean, one of the things that I want to see concurrent to obviously Parliament moving to allow for cumulative effects of stormwater as a matter for consideration is, does our investigation move in terms of requirements, for example, for stormwater attenuation to mitigate effects, in an environment where we're suffering from climate change and extreme weather, and we don't have the infrastructure to accommodate all of that stormwater in from properties which were previously lawn but now turning into a concrete jungle. So is that are you foreshadowing that that's been picked up as part of our requirement with healthy waters for inclusion within the Unitary Plan? It should be.
John, I'll start, and Wayne can correct me if I'm wrong and potentially add to it. But as I've mentioned before, one of the positive clarifications we've had through this process of the Amendment Act and clarifications from the Ministry of it, a number of our controls that apply citywide around things like flooding and areas with combined sewers and on-site detention, retention requirements in those areas. Stormwater management overlays that we have, the SMAF overlays they're called, all of those things we can continue to rely upon. We're not saying that they are absolutely perfect in all cases, and I guess our Section 35 monitoring work will be looking at how effective those controls are, but the positive is that we can, as a baseline, keep those existing controls in the combined sewer areas and in the flood-prone areas and so on. Wayne, is there anything else to add?
Yeah, I think John raised a very excellent point. I think even with all the new provisions included, the underlying stormwater provisions still apply. So that may speak to Councillor Newman, your point around the stormwater attenuation devices. But I think it's also important to recognise that amongst all this debate, that even the existing single house zone allows for 60% impervious surface area. So I think that's important context to keep in the back of mind as well.
Chair, well, if I can make a very quick comment at the appropriate time, or I can just address it now, Chair, and I won't participate further in debate, up to you.
I don't have any further questions, so with Member Wilson's permission, I'm sure we could go to your comment now, because it will dovetail nicely, and then I'll go to Member Wilson.
Fine.
Yeah. Thanks, Karen. Look, I guess what I would say is that I have some sympathy for the nature of the work that's taking place here. This is not easy, dealing with the consequences of what I think was a pretty rough piece of work by Parliament. But I think really in terms of the quality built environment, and I'm not sure how much you can, we can sort of require by industry standard top of the line in terms of urban design outcomes. I'd like to think that we can. I wouldn't be holding my breath. But to the extent that we're able to, one of the built environment outcomes that really needs to be focused on is putting a very high requirement on individual developments around stormwater attenuation. I have no qualms about requiring new developments basically to put in stormwater holding tanks as a condition of their consent to try and attenuate stormwater, given the impact of these developments and changing weather patterns on our severely constrained stormwater network. And I would make the point, Chair, that we should be absolutely holding the line on the requirement to do a lot of work on stormwater as a condition of development, particularly if we are not going to have responsibility for the stormwater network in the future, and a new entity is going to have to take responsibility for funding that. Good luck with them funding that. If they don't do it, it will largely be left up to the conditions of a consent as required by council to ensure that it is done by the private developer. So better that we address this now than rely on future stormwater investment from an entity for which we're not responsible for funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll now go back to Member Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to preface acknowledging all the hard work, the good work, the detailed work that's gone into this piece, and it's not an easy thing. My comment is around an inclination when Council has to demonstrate its obligations to Māori and Te Tiriti, and specifically the requirements under Policy 9 of the NPS-UD. It's not enough that you say that it was done in a general sense. When we're talking about amendments here that won't have been canvassed, they may have had feedback attached to them. So I guess I'm just emphasising yet again, Mr. Chair, it is not enough for you to say generally, because it has been canvassed, that this work would have come to the notice of mana whenua and or mātāwaka. So if I can leave it in that frame, if it's Policy 9 that's able to give you some comfort around what it is that requires to be done, so be it. But in a wider sense, when some say, how do you embody the principles of Te Tiriti, it is involving mana whenua and mātāwaka in these very significant kōrero. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Wilson. And I will now take the call of Councillor Walker.
Sure, Mr. Chair. So I'll just raise some issues here, and they were alluded to earlier by Councillor Watson in his statement on a previous matter, and that is around the likelihood of these medium density residential standards escalating the price of land, because the price of land that's paid is effectively related to its development potential. So we're going to see the price of land across much of Auckland going up. Obviously, the current homeowner will pay the price, but what we will see is a circumstance where the only people that will be able to buy these properties won't be homeowners in many instances, because they won't be able to pay the price that a developer can pay. So the developer will buy the property. It'll be developed to the max, because that's what they'll have to do to actually get their return. The bulldozers will scrape the site clear, including any trees. We'll have a concrete platform. We'll probably have concrete slab development, boundary to boundary, as close as possible to the road, and effectively the uglification of Auckland. And I have little confidence that we're going to have better quality intensification based on what we're seeing now occurring around Auckland, and Aucklanders see that. So I have a huge concern that, one, we will have increasing unaffordability of homes. Two, it will be nigh and impossible for new entrants into the housing market to compete with developers, and we will have largely a developer-led housing sector. Now, are we proposing to have some research and some information on this, Mr. Chair, to the officers?
You're on mute, Chris. Chair, sorry.
Couldn't hear a thing you said, Chris.
Thank you. My apology. We can't put that question right now, but you'll have to send that by email because we've asked the staff to withdraw for the comments and we've commenced comments. So the staff aren't able to answer any further questions, Councillor. Can you put that in writing to the staff, please?
Certainly.
Thank you. But please conclude your comment.
So my comment is effectively that we're destroying the Auckland that we know and love. We're effectively removing heritage. We're removing the existing built form that might lend to affordability and quality and replacing it with the exact opposite. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henderson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, I will be voting for this one. I just wanted to touch on just a couple of brief points. I can assist the councillors that are calling for more information, calling for independent reports, etc. And I'll direct them to the, here we go, we'll note this down, cost-benefit analysis of proposed medium-density residential standards. Now, that's an independent report by PwC and Stents Partners. And in there, it does indicate that they're finding, and an independent report, like I said, is that the land, is that through these changes, they're expecting house prices to at least dampen down due to the effect on land pricing. So that's not something I've come up with. That's something that's independent, and I would recommend councillors have a bit of a read on that if they do get the chance. The other thing I'd suggest is that I would push back on certain comments in the media, certain comments in previous debates about uglification, about Soviet-style gulags, and all manner of scary sounding things. The fact is, we are building some quality homes, quality townhouses in this city. I live in one. I know plenty of suburbs around my area that do have some quality homes, and we're building some also pretty rough stuff. And the fact is, the rough stuff is being built under our current regime. So our current regime isn't protecting anything. And I think this is an opportunity for us to do better. And this is something that staff have been working on, and I thank them for it. So I'm not going to accept that townhouse developments are some scary Soviet-style stuff. What I am going to accept is that, you know, staff have been working on it. So that is why I'm going to vote for it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Look, I want to take this opportunity to urge the staff to work harder on achieving better quality outcomes. I know that there's work underway, and I know the area that you can operate in here is significantly been reduced by the legislation that's come forward, that we cannot bring any design standard in. And with respect to your comments, Councillor Henderson, the design standards have been weakened. Yes, and we've already got a problem, but they have actually been weakened. They haven't been strengthened. And I think if you hear from the design community, urban designers, the Planning Institute, Urban Design Forum, you will hear all of them say that. Now, we thought we were getting close on getting the select committee to recommend that there be a coming together over in a bit of a fast gathering of design experts to look at the design standards and make a recommendation so that the legislation could be more fully informed. We lost that, even though all those parties were ready to act. But for us now, we're left with the legislation. We cannot introduce any design standards that make it less permissive. So it is quite a challenge to us, but it's a good challenge for our very talented people in the Urban Design Office and others to keep coming back to us with what we can do. And we're going to have to be very smart about this. And I'm not suggesting that we're going to make development less permissive, which we're not allowed to do. But I think our Aucklanders expect us to work much harder on this to achieve the quality of those built environment outcomes that we all expect. So my words today are really just an urging of our teams to look harder and come back with more that we can do to achieve the quality. Thank you. Are there any other comments, members? There being none, I will now go to the vote. It's moved and seconded. The motions are before us. And I will take the vote on voices. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
And to the contrary, no. Carried unanimously. We'll record that accordingly.
Sorry, could you record an abstention on that point for me, please? It's Chris Fletcher speaking.
Same, please.
Okay. Okay, so it was carried, not unanimously. I've just had a voice. And
my vote against. Wayne.
Councillor Fletcher, was it the all AB?
Yeah. And mine was
and Councillor, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm against
I'll
a
go
lot.
back to Kalinda and clarify that. I should have put it in the chat bar beforehand. I do apologise.
Thank you. That's fine. Okay, members,